This is Dave Monk, Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial. And we're in the throes of holidays for Christmas and New Year. And we're recording this on Wednesday, but the program is for Sunday, the 27th, after Christmas. So we wish you all the happiness of the period. It's kind of elegant in retreat. So we're all in our own territories and doing what we can for an isolated Christmas. And I think beautiful thoughts. I go back to Australia and it's summertime and it's very hot, extremely hot, climate change hot. I want to say that I saw the two planets coming together visually, many millions of miles apart. They were bright enough in the sky at dusk that you could see them from the end of Market Street, just right near us. I passed someone who was sitting in his car with the headlights on, and I wanted to remind him that was kind of light pollution. I didn't say it was light pollution, but I pointed out to him that way up in their sky there in the southwest direction were two planets shining brightly, even though many millions of miles apart, and he didn't seem so interested. So I walked along and watched, and I could see it from the end of Market Street. Amazing. The last time that it happened was like 13,000. So the next time will be way. And you have to think about higher authorities. If you do things like work with Alcoholics Anonymous, you have to think about whether you believe in God or believe in a higher power. And it's interesting that sometimes the higher power is something like the universe. It's just something you can't understand. And it is beyond human life. And so I was pleased to do that. I just hesitated on my walk around the detention pond just to see if I could find it, and didn't have any bother finding it up there in the sky. And it'll be there for a while longer. It was just on the solstice, it was the brightest day of its existence, and a little easier to see. Later, I'll say something about the periphery of the detention pond. But first of all, I want to say something about another local. His name was Fred Francis. And if you walk by the Union on the Green Street side of the Union and look up, there's a clock on the Union. It's not a Fred Francis clock, but it was. And I want to say something about Fred Francis because he was a unique person, and he's part of our history and part of our local history, and somewhat misunderstood because he was a unique person. Fred Francis was born in Kiwani, about 4 miles north of Kiwani, and next door to a cemetery, but the family farm was there. And father was an agriculturalist, but in wintertime he was also a teacher. So he taught Fred, and Fred eventually he was born in 1854, I think. So in that period, and he came to the university, which was called the Industrial University before it was the University of Illinois, and he joined in 1874. He got a degree in mechanical engineering. I think he got a master's degree. I'm not sure also. But the wonder of it was that he persisted and delayed his graduation some in order to write a thesis, which was just 4 lines long, which was a phenomenon in that period. And I think it was Fred, as a part of the class that he was with, that wanted to leave a heritage. And he, by this time, had taken off, and he had invented a mathematical model that allowed watch springs that broke regularly to be more permanent. And he had patents, and he made significant influence on the watch company, but then decided to retire to his family farm. His parents had died, but he was an innovative soul. So he by this time he had worked with the Industrial University, and his contribution was the clock and the union. And Bruce Hannon is a professor who, in geography and engineering, who has had a lot to do with clocks, and he's very much aware of Fred Francis's clock, and it's stored away in some safe place within the university framework. But there's a different clock in the Union now. So bring yourself back to Champaign-Urbana and know that this is a gentleman that has roots in Kewaunee, but also roots in a burgeoning university, which eventually became the University of Illinois. Well, Fred retired from the Elderton Watch Company at an early age and decided to do innovative things. He worked with the farm and build buildings, and one of those buildings was had an onion type Eastern European dome to it. They're rather innovative, and if you walk into the house, it is innovative. He did things with engineering. He created a long tunnel that came through cold soil, and he had a windmill that brought in cold air that way, and that was his air conditioning. No electricity, but he had a heater, and I'm not quite sure what the innovations were with the heater, but you could see through a panel in the floor if the heater was working. And those little things were innovative. He lost his girlfriend of the time to I'm not sure what, but he married his girlfriend's mother, and she was not well. I think it might have been with TB, but I'm not sure. But he built her a solarium. It's like you these days. You have a house and you have a solarium. It's where you keep your tropical plants in wintertime, and the sun comes in and gives you uh, uh, sunlight for photosynthesis and the like. Well, he built this solarium and the house with bricks that he got from a brickyard, and they were secondhand bricks. So he would uh, work with a mason chisel and tidy them up, and built this solarium. He would uh, move around with his wife as a passenger on his bicycle. Uh, he didn't wish to uh, use beasts of burden to carry his bricks, so his bricks were carried on the bicycle. He believed that walking around barefoot allowed you to make contact with biodiversity, and you see some of this happening these days. And every once in a while, he'd walk around with a toga or even less, and that was because you get air, free air, and uh, innovative thoughts. And the gutters from his roofs were made of hollowed out timber, and that was before you had an aluminum gutter that you could buy. And just little things like that were interesting. Uh, his wife was ate meat, and he was a vegetarian. And in the basement, they had two separate tables, and this was again an interesting but nice innovation. His wife died, and then he got a hernia, possibly because he was doing a fair bit of construction, and his hernia was very painful. And in those days, you didn't have access to doctors to. A hernia is uh, a an escape through your body wall of part of your intestine, and can very easily get strangulated. Uh, you would put a belt on with a stone that would push that hernia back into your body. So most people that had a hernia live with that sort of structure, but still very painful. He built himself a gun, and he built a mound outside his house, which is quite unique. And the mound was where he wanted to be buried, and he created a coffin where he could be, I think, fired up, so the remains would be on the mound. But he left his house and farm to the county, and you can visit these days. The difficulty I find with that is that to some extent it is regarded as a weird wonder. And this was a rather serious and very intelligent gentleman. And this wasn't really the wonder of the world. It was an innovation. And I think when I read history and see this announced as a sort of toy wonder, that disappoints me, because it was much, much more than that. So memories for Fred Francis, as you walk past the Union on Green Street, think about his life and wonder. Uh, I have been walking around the Second Street detention pond. You hear about this a fair bit because we took the Pocket Prairie from opposite us uh, when it became a beer garden. We took it across to the detention pond, and it's growing very well. But it has uh, unique problems. In the first place, with the Pocket Prairie, it had a forest, an edge timber, and a prairie. And that is lacking in the detention pond. The trees are more or less popsicles here and there. So the plants like bloodroot and ginger have lost out because there's just too much light. We tried for a little while to put salon. Salon is a material that comes in varying densities, so that if you're wanting to grow plants that are used to shade, you can have a very dense cover, but enough light that the plants survive. And you get to know what density. And if it's a plant that only needs a little bit of shade, then you can have a different type of salon. But unfortunately, in a public situation like that, to put a salon down is sort of violates the ambiance. So we've lost those plants. We have a section that is wetland because this detention pond takes on water. When you have a 5-inch rainfall, instead of flooding the campus, it runs into this big dig, and then the water is pumped out very slowly. So it doesn't flood campus town. And, this is about 2 blocks of housing that was removed, and the depth is probably about 20 feet. The boneyard comes in through 8-foot pipes, and then there are waterfalls, and the waterfalls are helpful because they aerate the water and allow organisms to sort themselves out. There are little fishes there. There are bacteria and other creatures that catch nutriments as they come through in the water. So when you see the waterfall is white, it's not only because there are bubbles of air in the water, it's because they're moving past little creatures that are netters that are netting nutriment. Well, that water fills the detention pond. It covers our prairie. That's not too bad because the prairie grew over 10,000 years, and it was very swampy. Champaign County was a swampy county. So the regular prairie can handle some flooding, but it can't handle really deep flooding. And one of our plots grows a lot of sedges. And just this week, I've had a discussion with Joel McDonald, who's a landscaper, and we're thinking to plant some wetland species there that do like to have wet feet and give people an idea of a different sort of territory. We have another site where we dropped prairie plants from the Pocket Prairie a little bit sooner than we thought, and but it's growing very well. But when you put plants into a tandem truck. When the tandem truck empties them out, it invariably turns them over the wrong way. And when you want to turn them up, you almost have to have a front end loader. If you're trying to do it by yourself or with friends and relatives, it's very, very heavy work. But the plants, they're growing, and some of the clump grasses are exhibiting themselves. Some of the rougher, tougher survivor plants doing well with the insects on them, surprisingly right up to the end, because some of them know the nutrition of the seeds. And so you have little weevils and other creatures that are there, and they're there. They came from the pocket prairie, and they have survived, and it's kind of fun to see them. First of all, working the flowers like bees and bumblebees and ants, and some of the plants like evening primrose. You'll see a line of ants running up the stems, and you have to know that the soft plaits of the evening primrose are subject to aphids, and the ants get to know that if they stroke gently the anal cerci of these insects, that they will exude a little bit of glucose, and that becomes food. And so the troop of ants goes back down to their caverns, and they can even grow gardens in some cases, because there are organisms that grow as a result of the nutrients that is there. And so it's amazing what you can see in a manipulated, engineered territory, and nature fitting in. I've been walking around it some, because I'm interested and intrigued. The sidewalks were planted to prairie species, fairly rough, tough prairie species, but they're there, and they're behaving just like prairie species. The big blue stem is fallen down already. It looks like a mat of 8-foot fruiting bodies, and for some it's rather ugly. For myself and others who know the nature of this plant, it's kind of beautiful. And so we are gently educating people about their heritage prairie that was occupied 94% of Champaign County. What was wet, what was dry. Some of the paths are quite dry, so little blue stem is there. Plants that can handle dryness. And I have to give credit to the designers of this detention pond, because on top of the boneyard, as it comes through under the University Avenue in 8-foot concrete pipes, there is a rain garden, and it takes water from the streetscape that's just a little higher, and it runs into the pond, and it's where it's deep. You have iris or flag lilies, as they're called, and there's a horticultural presentation, but it's done in line with nature. And so have been walking around the apartment buildings that are huge. Uh, I would suspect that some of them will handle many hundreds of apartments. They've replaced a school. But right alongside the detention pond, there are little pieces of streetscape, uh, a, a, a small rain garden with existing trees saved. Some of the trees are quite large. They're just one in the middle of the street, and the concreters have gone around so that the roots of the large tree might be 2 feet in diameter that can lift up concrete, but it also gives the tree a chance to live. And you have to know about humans that live in this area. You find a huge apartment building, but there will be a 3-story home that is recently painted, and you have to know that the lights on it are Christmas lights, and that there are people there that want to retain their existence in this place with some trees and shrubs in a vacant lot alongside. So you have to give credit to that sort of relationship. They appreciate the detention pond. They keep a note of where trees are planted and what ones survive, and it's friendly. It's not a conflictual situation. It's living with infill rather than having these apartments like out on 57, like the health services. It's that you can't get to without a car. This is having buildings infill in vacant lots in downtown, or take out an old school and replace it with functional apartments. In all that, the Bonyan is still there. It's given some meanders. It's given some glacial erratics that have come down by glaciation, and that allows the stream to retain some of its meanders. So you can wander along the east side and look at the 2 or 3 feet on the edge of the roadside, and you see little concreted areas that are gaps, so that the water that runs in there from a 5-inch rainfall can ooze into that place where you have to be surprised to see little bluestem growing and other plants that are native plants, and they're surviving, and actually they're surviving better than most cultivated plants that are used to water and fertilizer and all the rest of it. So I take photographs of these places, and in the future somebody might be interested in knowing about it. But most people that use the trails, innovative trails in a North Pond, which is shallower than the main pond, but they allow bikers and hikers and just people who like to view the wildlife. And there, if you're patient, you can see the a heron standing still, waiting to catch a fish, or you see the geese, which are a bugaboo to most people because they graze on the lawns, and they poop on the trails, and they poop on the lawns, and they allow the lawns to erode, and so yet they're creatures too, and there's a curiosity between the creatures and the public. There are people who come and provide them with food. The authorities would prefer that they did not do that, because that attracts more and more Canada geese. But then you see the young fellow wanting to waddle out into the lake uh, to pat the geese, not knowing that that's not really a possibility, but that he doesn't know how to get back. So you you have to have father that will go out there and pick him up. And this is a learning experience. It's sort of like a living zoo in a way. I was there late in the evening, mainly to see the Jupiter and whatever coming together. And I was watching the accumulation of geese going to bed for the night. I don't know whether they sleep in the water, but they also sleep on the land. But there's constant movement. It's almost as if they know each other and they can talk to each other. And foreigners that come in are not always acceptable. So you see the ecology of these animals amongst themselves. But there's 3 white ducks, and I've been watching them for months, and they're always together. They'll find a spot on the land, and you have to wonder how they talk to each other and where they get to. They all seem to have accumulated where there was an aerator spraying water out to give the pond some oxygen, and the birds and the wildlife come near, but not really near. But now that the spray is turned off for winter, then they move fast to that area, and the ducks move through the accumulated geese, and you really have to wonder how they sleep at night. And you also have to wonder when they start to breed, because they are very fecund and they can increase their population beyond public tolerance. So then there gets to be an extermination, which is kind of difficult for people who don't realize that we've created detention ponds and lawns that are attractive for grazing, and the water has fertilizer in it, so you get pond weeds that use that nutriment, and the geese especially can utilize that for food. So a rather wonderful sight, and it prevents the flooding of Green Street or Campus Town. The water eventually goes under the underground in huge pipes that you can walk through, and a tributary comes in from the south, and it disappears almost where there's a one of these houses that stays around. It's got lots of vegetation around it, and the person who lives there is a preservation person. He especially likes to gather old door locks or door handles and electrical fittings that come from a different era. And I'm sure that house will be there till he passes, and then the university or someone else will take it over, and it will become an apartment building. Some of the apartment buildings are amazingly narrow. You almost wonder how they get a stairwell up them. But construction can adapt to the different ways that people work with the gradual purchase and modification of the area. Uh, I looked at one lawn and it had two glacioratics, but it had a saw cut of a tree. It was a wooden piece that was about 2 feet across, not regular, but it had marks in it, almost as if it was a mark for someone to put an axe into the uh, end cut. It's when you work with wood, you have to follow its ways of organizing. Sometimes there's a phloem and a xylem, and uh, there are rays coming out from the middle. So if you have that sort of wood, then you break it with the axe facing from the bark into the center. Other woods will break differently. And these days we don't do it with our own axe, but we hire a machine, and you put hydraulic pressure on it, and it breaks the wood. Well, it's kind of interesting to see that block of wood being used as a protector of a lawn. So the little things like that make life interesting. We don't necessarily have to go to another country or to the mountains west to find interesting things happening. So now I wander down to the park. The detention pond is associated with a long-standing park. The administration of the two detention ponds is basically by the city. The park is administered by the park district, and it's been kind of interesting to watch it. It's named Scott Park after I think a mayor in the past, but it's a square plot. It has its moments because it was a little rambunctious with a stream going through it, the boneyard, and there was a shelter there that was attractive for people who wanted to do untoward things, and it has eventually been taken down and replaced by a pavilion that's much more open, and so you have to know that there are yins and yangs. There are wonders and there are difficulties, and still there's a tree that you look at and you see that its branches are broken at the top. You have to know that this tree has suffered through ice storms, and the branches are broken. And other branches are cut off because they're too low, and they might fall on people. That does happen. So preventative measurement is to cut those branches off, and just how the tree heals is interesting. Eventually that a cut will be covered over, and you will not know about it. Sometimes the trees are used as fence posts in early days, and that might involve a nail or two. So if you're a sawyer and you're going to saw trees that have been have died or fallen in urban situations, you're going to be in danger, because in the middle of that tree there might be a a little piece of steel that can really do wonders to your eyes and your brain and your body. So urban sawyers are very careful. It might be germane to say that many of the trees that were planted 50 years ago were fast-growing trees. There's a desire to have trees, tree city, and uh, so you look for trees like sycamores that grow quickly. And the problem is that they have big cells, and by the time they get to be 50 years old, they're weak. And if you have one of those 5-inch rainfalls that I talk about, uh, you can have 30 trees fallen in suburbs that were planted uh, to trees. These days, the cities are wise enough to ask for trees like oaks, slow-growing trees that will uh, hold up under tornadoes and rainfall and unusual circumstances. Often, some of these trees are dependent on friends and relatives. So if you're in a forest like brownfield woods or tree woods, some of the survival is because you have trees that are close. And in urban settings, the trees are almost always like popsicles. There's not a ecological relationship, so one protects the other. So there's a tendency for those trees to have smaller root systems because they're kept up by their friends. So when you wander around and look at the trees, you have to think about that. You look at the burls. There's one tree on the east of the detention pond that has is gnarly. And if you were a purist, you would replace that tree with something different. But somebody has decided to leave it. And it's not just one generation, there's been several generations. And there are burls. And early settlers would need bowls. So they would saw off the burl and carve it out, sometimes with a lathe, and create a bowl for use with in the kitchen. So there's that little element of something which is rather wonderful. We're in Scott Park now, and as I understand it, a couple of ecologists helped to put in the rain garden, and as a result, it has a lot of natural elements right up against people who are using the rest of the park for recreation. But it's a wonderful rain garden, and right at the entrance to it was a garden that is circular, and the ecologists had planted there culver's root. Culver's root is an elegant plant. It has candelabra type inflorescences. It likes moisture, but it stays erect, and it's wonderful if you know what you're looking at. But if you're an urban experience has been mainly with horticulture, you won't know that that is a representative of the excuse me of the rain garden. And so this last few months, there have been plants planted there that are low, and they're not part of the rain garden. So you have to know that when you're talking about heritage prairie, very few people understand it. Very few people know that that site was culver's root. Expensive plants if you plant them by the plants that have been grown in a greenhouse. you know, urban setting, you can very seldom plant seeds because it takes perhaps 5 years for the plant to grow to a situation where you would see it. So you have to buy uh, nursery plants. Uh, Eventually, they all got weeded out, and I imagine that the expense of doing that is serious. So that takes us back to teaching and how do you employ people to work with weeding and mowing uh, to understand the uh, intricacies of a rain garden, when to burn it, for instance. So we had a reading the landscape class in Parkland College for some time. It's been more or less replaced by uh, NRIS or uh, what used to be College of Agriculture, uh, Master Garden and Master Naturalist. But we would look at cultural things too. And from that class, we visited Fred Francis in Kiwani uh, and other places that let you understand your own territory. And, well, I have taken note of that little plot, and I have to appreciate that not everyone understands the relationship of the Culvers route to the meandering Boneyard stream. But I would like to suggest that the Culvers route find their way back there, and that they be part of what was intended to be a concession to horticulture, to have something a little more formal than the rambunctious boneyard with tall grasses and broadleaves. There, it's an area where the Asia aster and the New England aster has been flowering right up into the last few days. And the temperature now is, tonight it will be something like 18 degrees. So the asters are still in there. And so there needs to be an understanding of that. And there needs to be classes that understand the nature and the culture of our region. It's getting to be that we need to know more about who we are and what we are and what we can enjoy just walking around. You have to wonder about the huge apartment buildings that look over these areas and how they get to see a little bit of nature from those apartments. So the infill is good, but we have to watch to see that it survives. Just around the corner, there's another plot, which is largely a monoculture of bee balm. And when bee balm is in flower, it's a wonderful balm for bees. When it is in seed, in a natural prairie, it has all these seed heads that are used for birds and bees, and it's even in the middle of winter, there is grain in there that can be used. And it has this knob-like appearance that creates a picture of a plant with a lump on the end of it, which for artists gets to be rather interesting. But first of all the knobs, all the seed heads were removed. Yeah. I have to wonder whether that was to create seed for other places, but I don't think so. I think it was just tidying up the horticultural special plot. And then when I went last night, the 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 whole plot has been cut. It hasn't been weeded. The plants are there, and they're alive enough that they will come back in the next season. But if it was a native prairie that's right alongside, you would leave that stand to do its own thing, to stand up as bee balm usually does, or fall down like big blue stem does. Uh, there are seats there that you can sit and watch the creatures, the ducks in the creek, the goldfinches finding their way around, the migratory birds finding uh, a niche to be in. It's so I keep creeping around and watching what might be. And there's a tree with holes in lines, horizontal lines. It's a sapsucker. Belongs to the woodpecker tribe, and they are sucking the sap from a tree. And the tree survives, and all these lines of holes there. And if you have a camera, you can go right in and find a new landscape. And if you back off, you might just find a a uh, a biological situation. Well, uh, that alarm clock, we're getting to be near the end. I want to say thank you to the Nevada Public Television, which allows us to uh, walk around the landscape and then uh, interpret it to you folk. I want to thank WEFT for allowing us to do this sort of programming. We've had the advantage of Dave Whitsani, who has helped us to put pictures into these programs. So our radio program airs as a radio program. It airs online. You can get it worldwide. But then we take that program and put pictures into it, and it using a Vegas program, which requires some good technology, because there's artistry and there's technology, and you need to get them together. If you're going to tell people about these things that you're looking at, you need to be able to get the vibrancy of the picture. And so a camera helps, and we can add video segments or still segments. The cell phones are handy because you can walk around with them, and if you see something like a log of wood that you find interesting, then it's right there. Or you can get a video camera and even tie it to a wheelchair or a dolly and roll it around the pathways and let people know about something that they might not even know about. So this is all made possible by people who are interested in media, and the world has gone in a media direction. And often one picture is worth 1,000 words. So there's an efficiency to it. And I would like to continue to encourage the visual side of our work. And so as we come to a new year, we like to suggest that you keep your eye on these things. it has been possible to not have to spend $1 million to tell a story. So you can have your own video camera and tell a story in a fun way. And uh, it might be slow, but it might also be instant gratification. And you can bring your own artistry to it. And young people especially are doing that. So we say thank you for all the wonders that are and will be. And we hope you'll be looking at climate because it is changing and we have to adapt to it. And the trees that are growing in one place will be out of place. If you're looking at a giant sequoia, it might need cold. And if you're not careful, the cold will go. And so you may lose that tree that might be 3,000 years old and 8 feet across. So keep your eye on the ecology. It's important. It's not the only. When you evolve your scientific details, you then have to work with politicians and others who have a different point of view. And there has to be a balance here somewhere. But the ecologists should be speaking it out because it's much more natural to have a limited population of people, limited utilization of the resources, and a balance between the plants and animals. So that's enough. This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT, Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.